Hi, and welcome to It's Not Obvious, Java Edition, and today I'm going to be talking about function parameters. All right, so in this episode, the prerequisites are variables and basic functions, and I will be revisiting scope and talk about arguments versus parameters. As always, this episode is primarily intended for my students in University of Washington for my CSS 142 students, but this is also useful for anyone who are new to creating functions and methods for Java in particular. So before I proceed, I'd like to begin with answering this question, is this programming? This is really an overview of one of the tools that you need to properly engineer a complex program. And specifically, we're talking about how to build reusable components. And that's what methods are really intended to be for, to be a highly reusable, repeatable components. Okay, so last time I talked about the components of a function, in other words, a method. And keep in mind that functions and methods are synonyms, and I'm going to be using the terms interchangeably, both in class as well as in my recordings. So last time we talked about the access modifier, qualifier, return type, name, parameter list. Today I will be focusing primarily on the return list. Okay, so and in terms of creating your own function, last time we talked about how the function name can be anything you want, and at minimum it must contain some sort of a return type. For now, we're just using the return type void. It needs to have a method name, and the method name again can be anything you want. It needs to have method parameters even if it's empty, and today I will be exploring what it means to have a non-empty parameter list, and the body, which includes any statements that you want. For this episode, I will still be using the void return type. I'm not going to be exploring various return types just yet, but keep in mind that what you learn for this episode with the parameter list can be used for pretty much any type of method, including methods that have return types. All right. Now, let's first create multiple methods and explore what the problem is with scope. So, going to open BlueJ again as always, and now that we've done this a few times, I am just skipping ahead to assuming you know how to create a project, and assuming you know how to create a class, and you know how to get in here and create a main method and try out hello world. Okay, hello world, execute, run just fine. Now let's create multiple methods. So let's say public static void, and the method name can be anything we want. So let's say hello, and let's also create public static void say goodbye. Now, let's say that among other things, we have also included some sort of a user input, which requires us to import Java util scanner. And let's say we have scanner s equals new scanner system in and system out print line. Please tell us your name. And now we have string name equals s.next. All right. Now, let's say we have something like this. Let's compile this. Let's run this real quick. And let's say, please tell us your name. I'll say Hansel, and it basically has Hansel. Now, we know that instead of the main method, we can do system out print line hello plus name. We execute this, and we say Hansel, and the program says hello Hansel. Now, what if we want to include this hello plus name inside of say hello? Immediately we get an error message that says cannot find symbol variable name. And that's because name, string name, is actually defined here inside of the main method. It's not available inside of the say hello method. Okay, so let's explore what's really happening in the background. So first of all, if we were to think about what's happening with the variables, first we have main, and let's think of it as the scope. Main method is the scope, and the type is scanner, and the name is S, and the value is an instance of scanner. Okay, then we go from there. I'm going to adjust this real quick. Then we go from there, and we have another variable inside of the main method, which is name, and which is a string, and the name is just name, and the value is whatever the user gives. In this case, let's say Hansel. Okay. But now, because these variables only exist inside of main, when we go to say hello, there's no variable called name in here whatsoever. In fact, there's no variable declared in here yet at all. Now, we could theoretically fix this by having string name equals John. And now, instead of say hello, we have a variable type of string, and we have another variable that's exactly the same name as this variable inside of main. So string name, John. And here the value is John. All right, so now that fixes this error that says, hey, I don't know what this variable called name is. We don't have that, and we fix that by adding the string name equals John in here. Compile. Okay, so let's compile this. Let's run this and see what happens. So now what happens is we get Hansel, and nothing happens because we haven't called say hello. So let's say we call say hello in order to execute this code. We compile this again, and we run this again. And now if I say Hansel, we get instead hello John. And the reason is because the computer runs through this from top to bottom as always. And we go line 7, we create a new instance of scanner. We print, please tell us your name. Line 10, we get the name from the user. We get some sort of a string really from the user. And then we call the method say hello, which means it jumps down here to line 15. Line 17, we create a variable string named John. And we create and then we print out hello plus name, but name instead of say hello is John instead of what was given over here. Okay, so let's update this to look like this. All right, so we go create a scanner instance, create a string, value is Hansel because that's what I gave as the user. And then we call say hello, and instead of say hello, we have string name, but the value is John. We can actually repeat this multiple times and see what happens with different input just to show you that it doesn't really matter what the input is. It's going to change. It's not going to change hello John. So let's say Tina. For Tina, it still says hello John. We can repeat this again. And let's say we have Ken. Again, it says hello John because regardless of what the value of name is instead of main, Tina or Ken, it doesn't change the value of John instead of string name over here. So now you might be thinking, well, okay, in that case, then maybe we should just put this whole thing inside of say hello. And maybe you're right. Now if you want to do say hello, and we compile this, and we run this, we get please tell us your name, Hansel, and now it properly says hello Hansel. But now, if we want to say goodbye, let's say system out print line goodbye plus name, we encounter the same problem again because this works inside of the hello say hello method. It says hello Hansel, goodbye Hansel. But if we want to put this inside of the main method, we get the same error, cannot find symbol, variable name. And if we want to put this inside of say goodbye, again, exactly the same error, cannot find symbol, variable name. So clearly, by moving the scanner, by getting the user input instead of say hello, fixes some things, but it doesn't fix other things. Now, theoretically, you could put this whole thing with the scanner instead of main and instead of say goodbye. But then you end up with other weirdness, and I'm just going to demonstrate what that looks like. So let's say we run this. Please tell us your name, Hansel, and then it asks me to tell us to tell it the name again. So let's say Tina, and we run this, and then it says hello Tina, and then it stops because we never got around to calling say goodbye. If we were to say goodbye, you'll see that we're actually asking the user to put in their name again for a third time, which is not a good experience. So Hansel, Tina, John, and it asks for the name 3 times. So clearly, asking for the name 3 separate times and having specific methods that responds to that isn't really quite the way to go. Right, so let's explore another mechanism, which in this case we'll call string name instead of say hello. And you'll notice that immediately the moment I say string name, a couple of things happen. One, it no longer says that there's an error when it comes to name instead of say hello. And 2, now instead of say hello, all of a sudden it says that I need to give it a string. Method say hello in class example cannot be applied to given types. Required, string, found, no arguments. And this error is saying that the actual and former argument lists differ in length. Basically, this is a really fancy way of saying that, hey, you need say hello now requires you to give it a string in order to call it. You don't have a string here. Let's give it a string. Now we can give it John, and all of a sudden it's a lot happier. It's not angry at us anymore. Say goodbye still doesn't have name, so we'll do string name. And again, say goodbye now requires some sort of string that we give to it. And let's say we do Tina. Right, so now when we run this and we say Hansel, it runs into line number 12, say hello, John. John actually goes into say hello string name, and which is why we print hello John. And then we come back here to line 13, say goodbye Tina. Tina, as an argument, goes into string name for say goodbye. And that's why when we say goodbye name, we get Tina. Now, we want to say hello and we want to say goodbye to the user, to the name that the user gave. So instead of John and Tina, we can replace this with name from the user. Compile, run, and now finally we have Hansel, hello Hansel, goodbye Hansel. Okay, so now let's explore what's really happening. Here, when we run through everything, and let's say line of code, let me include this in here. Line of code. And first, we begin by line 7. We create, inside of main, a scanner variable, and the name of the variable is s, and the value is an instance of scanner. Then we go down to line 9, line 10, and that's when we create, inside of main, a string variable called name, and the value is what the user gives. Okay, then we go down to line 12, which runs down to line 16, and here line 16 has a parameter called string name. Okay, so I'm gonna say that this is line 12 and 16. Now say hello, string name, and what is passed, well, let's say the argument that is passed into this method call parameter. Okay, so basically the value is whatever is in here instead of the parentheses when you call say hello. Whatever you put in here, it goes into here. All right, now you might be thinking probably the reason is because name and name has exactly the same name and it has to be that way, and I want to demonstrate that it really doesn't have to be the case at all. So let's say we just have string s over here, and now all of a sudden name again no longer exists, so we need to change this to hello s. and we can compile this. And just for demonstration, we can also change string name for say goodbye from name to, let's say, y. And now we need to also make this y. So now if we were to come back over here, say hello, string, and now this is s, the argument that's passed into the method say hello. And then we print it out. We come back over here to line 12. We go to line 13, say goodbye name. And now 13 and 21, we have a string. Say goodbye, string, and let's say y. And again, the argument that is passed into this method called parameter. Okay? All right, so let's try this out and see what happens when we change the name of the parameters. Let's say I put in Hansel, and it still says hello Hansel, goodbye Hansel. Because the way this works is that the computer doesn't really care what the variable names are. When the variable name is used, it looks up what the value is inside of the variable. In this case, because I put in Hansel inside of name, it says say hello, basically the same thing as saying say hello Hansel. Hansel then goes into S, which is why the value is now Hansel, and which is why when you say hello plus S, it says hello Hansel. Comes back up here, say goodbye name. Again, the value of name is still Hansel, which means that this is exactly the same as saying Hansel. And then Hansel is also what's passed into Y, which is why when we say goodbye plus Y, it says goodbye Hansel. Okay. Now, again, that's the reason why we want to have variable names, because then we can change it to whatever we want at any time with the value that is assigned to the variable. So let's think about this some more. If a variable or a value from one method is inaccessible to another method in the same class, the way we address this that I've shown you just now is to use method parameters. This also talks about scope, because the idea is a scope typically exists within the same statement block but not outside of that statement block. Coming back over here, scanner S and string name is inside of this one yellow statement block, and it doesn't exist inside of say hello or say goodbye. We make it possible for S, but now instead of a scanner S, we have string S. We make it possible for string S to be available instead of say hello, and string Y to be available and say goodbye by declaring it in the parameter list. Okay, so I hope I'm not going too fast in there. But the idea is, with method parameters, you want to declare variables in the parameter list. But the moment that you put a variable declaration instead of a parameter list, you are required to give the correct number of arguments, in other words, values, when calling the method. Now, variables declared in the parameter list actually has the same scope as variables declared in the method. I've shown you what that means, as in S in here, string S, is available for hello plus S, and string Y is available for goodbye plus Y. But there's another way that we can verify that this is the case. So remember that you cannot have two variables of the same name within the same scope. In other words, let's say if we were to say here string name equals John, we get an error saying that variable name is already defined in method. And same thing, if we do string S equals John, it says variable S is already defined in method because we have scanner S, and now we cannot have string S. All right, now that I've given you a refresher about that, let's come back over here. We have string S in the parameter list. What if we were to say string S equals Tina? It again gives us the same error message. Variable S is already defined in method say hello. Okay? And same thing if we were to do, let's say, int S equals 5. It doesn't matter that you have a different variable type, because the variable name is already defined in a method. You cannot repeat it. Now, this is another way that I can show you, that I can prove to you, that the way the computer works is that whatever variable you define in the parameter list is treated as if it is declared inside of the method itself. Okay, now let's think about a few different things. What kind of variables can be declared in the parameter list? Pretty much any variable types. And another question is how many variables? The short answer is as many as you want, but then you would have to have the correct number of arguments when you call the method. The order of the variables is kind of up to you, but when you change the order of variables, you also change the order of arguments. And what can you do with the arguments that are passed into a method's parameter list? Technically, anything you want, and it is really anything that you can do with the values with the variables for your program. So let's explore a few more things on this. So let's say string s, and let's say scanner user input. Now we have string and a scanner as parameter. Now all of a sudden say hello is saying that, hey, say hello requires that you use string and scanner. It found only a string. It also needs a scanner instance. So now I can say hello name s, and now it's happy with me. Name s, so name goes into s, string s, and s, which is a scanner instance, goes into scanner user input. Now if we really want, we can actually go from here and say something along the lines of system out println, how are you doing today? And then let's say we get user input, and let's say we get string answer equals user input dot next and system out print line, good to hear your plus answer. Okay, now we can actually share the scanner instance from the main method into say hello, because again it just takes whatever the value is of an argument of a variable and put that into the parameter. Let's compile this. Let's run this. And now please tell us your name. We got Hansel. And hello Hansel, how are you doing today? I'll say cold. Good to hear you're cold. I'm cold because my furnace actually is having problems right now, and yeah, just I'm kind of cold. Anyway, so that's why that came to mind. So you can see here that the point is the user gets to give an input instead of say hello, and you didn't have to declare a scanner instance and say hello again because you're already passing a scanner instance from the main method into the say hello. It's using exactly the same instance as main. So same thing also if you want to have string y int x, for example, and let's say something like this, and now say goodbye needs to have some sort of an integer, and let's just give it 7, compile, run. Please tell us your name. Hansel, how are you doing today? Happy, glad to hear, good to hear you're happy. Goodbye, Hansel 7. And again, it's because you give the number 7 and you put it in here. Do you have to use every single parameter that you pass into a method? And the short answer is no. Just now we have goodbye Hansel 7, and it doesn't really make sense. We don't really need to say goodbye Hansel 7. We can leave the parameter there. It means that we're required to give the correct argument to be passed into it, but we don't have to use it ever. Hansel, hello, good to hear your hello. Goodbye Hansel, and int x instead of say goodbye is never used at all. Okay, so you could theoretically have as many things as you want, and let's say the order again doesn't really matter. If we were to say int x string y, the only thing that matters is that the order of the arguments are also needs to be comparable to the order of parameters. So here it gives us the error that it's thinking that a string is trying to be put instead of an integer, and you cannot convert a string into an integer. That's why it's giving you that error. So if we were to put 7, comma name, all of a sudden things work just fine. Things work the way we expect it to. We can compile this, we can run this. And this time I'm just gonna say John, hello John, and how John is doing today is, let's say, hangry. Good to hear you're hangry. Goodbye, John. And again, int x is not used at all. You can have as many things as you want in the parameter list, and I'm just going to demonstrate that before we end this episode. Let's say boolean b, double d, and we can also have multiple things, string message, string s, and we can have scanner user input. We can have as many things as we want here. And the number one thing that changes is that in say goodbye, it basically says it's required, etc. And it says that it only found integer and string. If we were to give it something appropriate, so now we go from integer, string, we need a boolean, let's say false, and then we need a double, let's say 3.7, we need a message, let's say A, we need another message, let's say B, and we need a scanner, and we give it S, and all of a sudden, everything compiles and works just fine. I'm going to end the last episode with Tina, and Tina is doing bubbly. Good to hear you're bubbly. Goodbye, Tina. And you see that the only thing that needs to be used is whatever you want to use. In this case, I only need to use string y. I didn't use anything else inside of this parameter list. And the only thing that changed is that you are required to have the same number of arguments as in the parameter, and you need to have the correct order of arguments as according to the parameter types in the parameter list. Okay, great. So that's it for today. As always, my question to you is, what were some things that were obvious to you? Did you learn something new? And if you like this episode, definitely let me know and subscribe for more content. Tell me also in the comments if there are other things that seems to be obvious to me in this episode that are not at all obvious to you. Thank you. See you next time.